"Don't jump," said a struggling dad. She was a CEO's heiress. Rain slashed sideways across the Brooklyn Bridge, a hard, needling torrent that turned every plank slick and every breath into cold steam. The wind came in angry bursts, pushing fog across the spans and smearing the skyline into a tired watercolor. Midnight had drained the city of color. What remained was silver, black, and the thudding ache behind Liam Carter's eyes. He kept his coat clamped tight around the small bundle in his arms. Emma, 2 years old, warm as a sunlit memory, slept against his chest with the solemn trust only toddlers have. Her breath feathered his collarbone. The coat was the only thing he owned that could still be called good, and tonight it was hers. His own shirt was a second skin, soaked, chilled, and smelling of rain and old soap. His boots took the slick boards carefully, one after another, because the last thing he could afford was a fall. Another late shift. Another paycheck that would land and vanish like a stone in deep water. He lowered his head and let the wind hit the back of his neck instead of his face. That was when he saw it, first a smudge in the weather, then a human shape carved out by lightning, a woman, barefoot on the outer railing. Liam stopped. Even at a distance, the posture read like a headline, arms loose, shoulders slumped forward toward the void. The dress she wore, some light fabric that had seemed like a choice hours earlier, was now an icy second skin, plastered to her frame. Her hair whipped across her face in wet, frantic ribbons. His stomach dropped. Not tonight. Not if he could help it. He checked Emma, still asleep, a tiny fist mashed beneath her cheek, then moved. It wasn't a decision. It was legs, lungs, and a burst of adrenaline that made the night sound thinner. He ran, boots hammering the planks, rain needling his eyes, Emma jostling against his ribs. "Hey!" he shouted, the words snapping in the wind. "Hey, don't!" The woman glanced back, startled, just a fraction, and her foot slipped on the slime-slick iron. She pitched forward into darkness. Liam lunged. His hand found her wrist by instinct, a blind grab that caught bone and skin at the very edge of too late. The yank nearly tore his shoulder from its socket. His knee smashed the railing with a sound he felt more than heard, white pain flaring hot and mean. He grunted, teeth bared, refusing the scream that would wake Emma into terror. For a heartbeat the world held its breath, his weight tilted outward, her body pendulumed over the river, and the wind, joyless and loud, tried to peel them apart. Emma jolted awake and cried, a thin sound drowned by rain. Liam tucked his forearm hard against her back, pinning her to his chest without crushing her, while his other hand clamped the stranger's wrist. The woman dangled, legs kicking air, the East River a sheet of hammered iron far below. Her free hand clawed at nothing. Her nails scraped uselessly at wet metal. "Don't look down," Liam barked, breath flashing white. "Look at me. Right here." "I can't," she gasped, water and hair matted across her mouth. "I'm slipping." "You're not," he lied evenly. "I've got you." The truth, his fingers were already sliding. Rain and cold had turned skin to glass. Every kick she made shook more heat out of his muscles, replaced it with a numb, chewing ache. "Stop moving," he said, pulling his voice steady, like he used to in burning hallways with smoke in his throat. "Freeze everything but your eyes. Breathe with me. In, out." A shudder rolled through her arm. She tried. He felt it, tiny changes under his palm, a fight against panic. "Okay," he said, the word a bridge he could build between them. "Okay. Good." He pressed them aside into the upright posts, wedging her safely between his chest and the iron. One quick look, her eyes huge, wet lashes stuck to her cheeks, lower lip trembling. "It's okay, Peanut," he breathed. The lie again, but softer. "Daddy's here." He switched grips, rehooped his fingers lower on the woman's wrist, then slid his other hand down to capture her forearm. He needed friction, leverage, something to steal a centimeter at a time. The railing's edge bit his forearms raw. His knee throbbed in hot pulses. The wind shoved him and he shoved back. "Listen to me," he said, voice roughened by cold and a year of swallowing grief. "You don't have to end it on this bridge. I didn't mean. She coughed, choking on rain. I thought I can't. You can't, he said. Just not alone. He pulled. She screamed, not from pain, but from the shock of upward motion when every cell expected down. Her ankle banged iron. He didn't pause. He used the bounce to reset, dragging her wrist higher until he could clamp her elbow. His shoulder shrieked. He welcomed the pain. It meant the arm was still there to use. On 3, he said. You're going to kick up, not out. Up. Meet me halfway. I can't feel my hand. She sobbed. That's fine. Feel your knee. Ready? 1, 2, 3. She kicked. He hauled. Something caught, the ridge of her shoeless foot, the friction of soaked skin on rough metal, the simple luck that sometimes shows up late and still counts. Her hip banged the inner lip of the railing. He released her wrist to snake an arm around her waist. Got you, he grunted, forehead pressed to iron. I've got you. For a second she was dead weight in his arms, terrifying in its completeness. Then she clutched back, fist in his shirt, face in his shoulder, and he used that desperate hook to pivot and dump them both onto the walkway in one graceless, life-saving tangle. They hit hard. The boards slammed his spine. Air left his lungs in a flat, ugly sound. He held on anyway, arms wrapped around a stranger whose whole body had turned to shaking. She sobbed into his chest, gasping in broken pieces. He didn't say it was okay. It wasn't. He just breathed with her, counted each ragged inhale as a small, defiant victory. Emma crawled, whimpering, into the cradle of his legs, pressing a damp cheek against his thigh. He loosened one arm to scoop her close, made a human shelter out of tired bones and a soaked coat. You saved me, the woman whispered, voice swallowed by wind. He shook his head, water flying from his hair. I reminded you, he said, almost gentle, that you're still worth saving. Lightning blinked somewhere over Manhattan. The thunder arrived late and exhausted. Cars hissed by, curtains of spray lifting and falling. No one stopped. The bridge is a river of its own. Some tragedies slip through its current unseen. Can you sit up? He asked after a long minute. We need to get out of the wind. She nodded, a small, jerky motion. He helped her to her elbows, then to sitting, keeping Emma tucked tight. Up close she looked younger than he'd thought, late teens, maybe 19. Barefoot, her toes were bone-white and shaking. A thin chain glinted at her throat. The charm on it was upside down and unreadable. Rain had scrubbed the cosmetics from her face and left something truer behind. Terror, yes, but also shame, and the stunned, newborn look of someone who'd just landed back inside their body. What's your name? He asked. Her mouth open-closed. I can't, she said softly, a flinch more than a refusal. Okay, he said, accepting it without judgment. Names could wait. Warmth couldn't. We're going to the end of the bridge. There's a covered bus shelter. It's not much, but it's out of the worst of it. He shifted, testing the knee. Pain shot up his thigh and settled behind his eyes like a hot coin. He stood anyway, because he always stood when Emma needed him to. He shrugged out of the coat and wrapped it around the woman's shoulders before she could protest. You'll freeze, she said. I've done worse, he answered, but softer, as if the words were for himself. He lifted Emma, who tucked her face into his neck like she used to when thunder scared her. Then he held out a hand to the woman. She looked at it as if it were a verdict, or an absolution, then took it. They walked. Not quickly. Not heroically. Just 3 people moving through weather, step by careful step, the woman leaning a little when the wind pushed too hard, Liam shifting Emma's weight to keep his balance. All of them focused on the simple, stubborn work of leaving the edge behind. By the time they reached the shelter, the rain had tired and fallen to a silver drizzle. Liam eased the woman onto the bench and draped the coat tighter around her, tucking the collar up against her throat, the way you do for someone you loved without thinking. Emma stirred and sighed, the sound small and determined, like a promise to sleep anyway. Liam stayed on his feet, rocking once, twice, a leftover habit from the colicky nights, then looked out through the plexiglass at the smeared lights of the city. He was shaking now that it was over, adrenaline burning off and leaving cold in its wake. His knee throbbed with the steady insistence of something that would matter later. He catalogued the facts like a list he could control. They were alive. They were off the railing. They could breathe. Behind him, the woman pulled the coat tighter and stared at the ground, hair dripping into her lap. Silence gathered, not empty but thick, like the fog curling along the cables above them. "Thank you," she whispered at last, the words so quiet they barely rose above the steady patter on the roof. Liam nodded, eyes still on the river. "You're welcome." He didn't ask why. He didn't tell her it would be okay. He just stood there, a soaked man with a sleeping child and a stranger's life on his conscience, listening to the wind tire itself out, waiting for whatever came next. The plexiglass awning rattled above the bus shelter, the storm downshifting from a roar to a tired hiss. Across the river, Manhattan blurred into a smear of sodium light. Liam stood guard with Emma on his shoulder and the stranger on the bench in his coat, and tried to slow the jackhammer in his chest. The quiet didn't last. Memory shouldered in, flashing red, a stairwell of smoke, the radio barking his name a year ago. He saw Sarah again the way he always did at night, her hand on the crib rail, her mouth shaping. "It'll be fine." The apartment filling with heat as if time itself had caught fire. He tasted ash. He heard himself refusing to leave. He felt the arms that dragged him out, and the silence that followed when the third floor folded like paper. A gust slapped the shelter and blew the picture away. The woman shivered and pulled the coat tighter. Rain threaded down her hair and dripped off her chin. "You're safe," he said, realizing how thin the words sounded in a city like this. She nodded without looking up, jaw clenched as if holding the rest of her together. Up close she seemed younger than her posture on the railing had suggested. Bare feet pinked with cold, toenails chipped, a thin chain at her throat with a charm flipped backward. "Do you have someone I can call?" he asked. "A friend, a roommate?" "No," she said quickly, as if the word might shut a door before he could see inside. Then softer. "I had someone. She died. Car crash when I was 16. Liam lowered himself onto the end of the bench, Emma heavy and warm against his shoulder. He didn't reach for the woman. He kept the space between them uncomplicated and left the door open if she wanted to step through. "She was everything," the woman said. "We used to walk this bridge." She said standing between two places helped her breathe. A crooked laugh broke and fell. "After she died, my dad turned into a machine. All business. No, anything." She swiped rain from her cheek with the back of her hand. "When I turned 18, he signed me up for business school. Said I'd take over the legacy. I hate it. I wanted to paint. He called it a hobby." Her eyes flicked to the river and away. "Last month he told me I was getting married. His partner's son. A merger with rings." Liam didn't fill the silence. The wind did that, whistling along the cables. "He said if I walked away, I lost everything, the money, the name, the home." She swallowed. "So I ran. I ended up here. My mom loved this view. I thought maybe I could stop thinking." "I know the hollow you're talking about," Liam said, tone level, "the way you talk to a skittish dog, calm, no sudden moves. I carried it after my wife died. Some days I still do." The woman's eyes shifted to the child on his shoulder. Emma's lashes, fat with rain, clumped into tiny fans. Her thumb rested against Liam's collar like a claim. "She kept me on the planet," he said. "I didn't have a choice except forward." He nudged his chin toward the end of the bridge. "Come on. There's a guy I know nearby. Warm room. No questions." A taxi's headlamps smeared through the drizzle. Liam raised a hand. The car pulled to the curb with a wet sigh. He bundled Emma, guided the woman in, and gave an address in Brooklyn that had saved him more than once. Joe opened his door in wool socks and an old FDNY sweatshirt, eyebrows up but no lecture in sight. The radiator pinged. Heat lifted out of the floorboards with a baked dust smell that made Emma melt into Liam's shoulder. "She needs a place tonight," Liam said simply. Then she's got one, Joe answered, as if the words had been laid out waiting. In the living room, the couch sagged like it had seen too much television and 3 generations of naps. Liam fetched a towel from the bathroom. Emma wriggled down and, with the solemn efficiency of a 2-year-old, offered the towel to the stranger with both hands as if presenting a medal. Cold? Emma asked. A little, the woman admitted, eyes startled by kindness from someone so small. This will help, Emma said, dragging the towel up to her chest. The woman laughed once, cracked and real, and wrapped herself up. Thank you, sweetheart. Liam rattled in Joe's cabinets until he found a dented kettle and a half-sleeve of chamomile. He set 2 mismatched mugs on a scarred coffee table and waited for steam to curl. It's not fancy, he said, embarrassed the second the words left his mouth. It's perfect, she said, cupping the mug like it was a campfire. Emma slid into a drift of blankets by the radiator and fell asleep mid-sigh. Liam took the armchair opposite the couch, his shirt still wet, his knee throbbing, a warning he'd promised to ignore in the morning. You should take your coat, the woman said. You're freezing. It looks better on you, he answered, a tired smile ghosting across his mouth. She watched him watch his daughter, how his whole body leaned toward Emma even at rest, how he tracked the tiny sounds of her sleep without thinking. Then she turned the mug slowly and asked, Why did you help me? Because someone helped me, he said. After Sarah died, I didn't know how to do anything except breathe and keep the baby fed. Joe showed up. He didn't fix it. He just stayed. She let the word roll around. Stayed. As if it had weight she never allowed it to have. My dad only stays for quarterly calls and photo ops, she said. When I'm useful. Love isn't usefulness, Liam said quietly. It's presence. Especially when it's ugly. Her eyes filled, but it wasn't the same flood as before. Something else slipped in, gratitude's first warm foothold on cold rock. She set the mug down and pulled the coat tighter. I haven't felt human in weeks. Being pulled off a bridge comes with a free reset, he said, a thread of dry humor easing into his voice. Small print, you have to sleep. A smile shocked itself onto her face. She lay down carefully, shoes tucked under the couch, knees drawn up. The coat, the only good thing he owned, became a small tent under which her breath evened. At the doorway Joe's voice came, low and practical. 2 extra blankets on the chair. Clean sheets if she wants the guest room. Thanks, Liam murmured. He adjusted Emma, who made the curious grinding noise she always made before sinking into heavy sleep, then eased onto the edge of the couch's far cushion, not touching the woman but anchoring the room anyway. Her eyes were nearly closed when she whispered, My name is Aurora. Liam nodded once, as if receiving orders. I'm Liam. Emma, she added, looking at the child with a softness that surprised her. Emma, he affirmed. The radiator hummed a low lullaby. Outside, the rain finally ran out of things to say. Inside, 3 people who hadn't meant to find each other arranged themselves into a shape that, for tonight, felt suspiciously like family. Aurora's breath went slow. Liam's hand found the frayed arm of the couch and held on. He told himself he'd stay awake, just to keep watch. His body disagreed. As the window turned from black to charcoal, sleep took him in a long, careful wave, his daughter's weight on his chest, a stranger's confession in his ear, and the first uncomplicated warmth he'd felt in a year holding still around them both. Morning bled into the little house quietly, through crooked blinds and the smell of burnt dust from the radiator. The storm had finally blown itself into memory. The air held that hollow calm that comes after a night of rage. Liam stirred on the couch, his back aching from hours of keeping still, Emma heavy and curled on his chest. For one precious second he forgot the bridge, forgot the screaming wind. Then he saw the towel folded on the coffee table. The space beside him was empty. Aurora was gone. He sat up too quickly, heart jolting, eyes darting toward the door. A slip of lined paper sat under the cold mug she'd left untouched, the words small but steady, "Thank you for not letting go. For reminding me I still matter." I needed to feel human again. I'll be okay now. His throat locked. She hadn't written a last name, no number, nothing that could tether her back to him. She had entered like the storm and left like the fog, dissolving before the sun. He touched the paper as if it were proof she had ever been there at all. For weeks he carried that note folded into his wallet. Sometimes he opened it on the subway, sometimes at work while hauling drywall or mopping basement floors, sometimes late at night when Emma's small breathing filled the silence. He wondered if Aurora had kept walking forward or if she'd only delayed another edge. Winter came hard. Liam worked anywhere that would hire him. Warehouse shifts, delivery runs, patching walls in apartments too drafty to hold warmth. His hands bled often, skin split open by cold. His back ached with a permanent knot, but he never slowed, because Emma needed oatmeal in the morning, needed mittens when the frost bit, needed lullabies when the loneliness tried to win. Then one gray February afternoon, while anchoring a steel beam at a downtown construction site, the rusted bolts gave way beneath him. He had time to shout once before the scaffolding folded. The fall was short but brutal. When he woke, the world was white and beeping. Pain throbbed through his ribs like a drumbeat out of sync. His wrist was bound, his head wrapped, and every breath cut like glass. The nurse told him 4 ribs cracked, a concussion, a fracture. He was lucky. Emma was staying with Joe. He lay in sterile air, floating in and out, body stitched together by strangers, mind clawing at the edges of panic because Emma wasn't there to touch. Days later, a new voice said his name. Liam? He turned his head slowly, vision swimming, and saw her. Aurora. Tall, elegant in a cream-colored coat, her hair braided back, a bouquet of pale hydrangeas trembling in her hands. For a moment he thought he was still dreaming. You, he whispered, the word fractured. She smiled, nervous and luminous all at once. Hey. He tried to sit up but pain shoved him down. I thought I'd never. I know, she said softly, moving closer. I'm sorry I left like that. I wasn't ready. I needed space. She set the flowers on the bedside table, sat carefully in the chair beside him. But when I saw your name in an online article about the accident, I came as soon as I could. His breath came rough, uneven. How did you even? There's something I didn't tell you, she interrupted gently. My full name is Aurora Whitmore. The word struck like a slap. Whitmore, the skyscrapers, the Forbes list, the empire whispered in boardrooms. He blinked, stunned. Yes, she said, reading his silence. That Whitmore. My father is Harold Whitmore. To most of the world, he's power and money. To me, he's control and silence. She drew in a shaky breath. I didn't tell you that night because I wanted, just once, to be seen without the shadow of him. And you didn't just see me. You saved me. Liam stared at her, unsure whether to speak, unsure whether he could. His mind scrambled over rent, hospital bills, diapers, the impossible wall of his reality colliding with hers. Aurora leaned forward, her voice steady. You gave me everything when you had nothing. Now it's my turn. Let me be here. Let me help. His throat worked around the words. You don't have to. I want to, she said firm. Because I've never felt more real than I did that night in the rain, with you. The silence that followed was different this time, not empty, but thick with something that felt dangerously like hope. And for the first time since the fall, Liam Carter let himself smile. The days after Liam's release from the hospital passed like fragile glass, every movement careful, every morning a test. His ribs still ached whenever he bent to lift Emma, his wrist throbbed if he carried too much, but he forced his body to obey. He had no choice. Bills still came. Emma still needed breakfast and bedtime stories. Aurora came often, her presence soft but steady, like sunlight sneaking past heavy curtains. She brought groceries in reusable bags, carried coloring books for Emma, and sometimes set down art supplies with shy explanations. I thought maybe you'd like this, she'd say, cheeks pink as if kindness needed an apology. She never pressed conversation when Liam's silences grew long. She simply stayed. She sat on the worn couch reading while Emma braided her hair in clumsy loops, or she helped Liam tape cardboard over a drafty window without complaining that her manicured fingers split. Little by little, the small apartment stopped feeling like a place for survival and began feeling like a place for breathing. Emma adored her. She clambered into Aurora's lap without hesitation, insisted she stay for dinner even when dinner was leftover soup and stale bread, and once whispered to Liam, while half asleep, "Aurora smells like home." That one sentence lodged so deep inside him he couldn't look at Aurora the next morning without his chest tightening. They walked together sometimes, slow, because of Liam's ribs, through the patchy park nearby. Aurora pushed Emma's stroller, chatting about the colors of the trees and how her mother used to describe each season like it was a painting. Liam listened, watching the way she pointed out tiny things to Emma, the way her voice grew warmer with each laugh the child gave. Spring crept into Brooklyn, tentative and new. One afternoon, they sat under a budding cherry tree, Emma chasing pigeons across the grass. Aurora turned to Liam, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "Do you ever think about starting over?" she asked. He looked down at his hands, scarred and calloused. "Every day. But it's hard when you're still carrying so much of the past." She nodded slowly, eyes distant. "For me, starting over would be a little art studio. Nothing grand. Just color and quiet. A place where people who feel too much could find a piece of themselves again." Liam smiled faintly. "Sounds perfect. For me? Maybe just a backyard with grass. Emma running barefoot. A place where I don't feel like the walls are always closing in. And maybe someone to share it with." Their eyes met for a moment, long enough for silence to bloom into something unspoken. Aurora looked away first, a small smile trembling on her lips. "That sounds like something worth building," she whispered. It was in those quiet days that Aurora began to see the details of Liam's world. The way he patched Emma's scraped knees with steady hands. How he reread the same bedtime story 3 times if she asked. How he tracked every dollar in a crumpled notebook, stretching small wages into food and rent. He never complained, never asked for help, even when the weight bent his back and bled his knuckles. Then one morning she learned about the hospital bill. The number was staggering, enough to crush even a strong man who was already walking a tightrope. Liam said nothing, but Aurora found out when the mail slipped open. Quietly, without fanfare, she paid it. A week later she found an envelope tucked under her sketchbook. Inside were $45 in crumpled bills and coins, and a note in his handwriting, "For the hospital. I'll pay the rest. I promise." The next week there was another envelope. $60 this time. Then 20. Then 35. Always small, always accompanied by the same line, "I promise." Aurora cried the day she realized what it meant. He wasn't trying to repay her money. He was telling her he would never take advantage of her kindness. That even with nothing, he would give everything he had, piece by piece, because dignity was the only wealth he still owned. One evening, Emma sprawled on the floor with crayons, drawing stick figures. She held up her picture proudly. "Look, Aurora, that's you. That's Daddy. And that's me." Aurora laughed. "And who are we?" "A family," Emma chirped, her eyes sparkling. She leaned closer. "You're my new mommy now, right?" The room froze. Liam's hand stopped midair. Aurora's breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes as she brushed a hand through the child's hair. "That's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said to me," she whispered. Emma hugged her and went back to her drawing. Aurora rose, trembling, and slipped into the kitchen. Liam followed slowly, his heart hammering. "I didn't mean for her to say that," he murmured, awkward, uncertain. Aurora shook her head, her voice breaking. "Don't apologize. Liam, I've never felt more like myself than I do here, with you." His answer was a step closer, his voice low but sure. "Me neither." They stood in the cramped kitchen, surrounded by mismatched dishes, flickering light, and the smell of stew simmering on the stove. It wasn't grand, it wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Something had taken root between them, delicate yet undeniable. For the first time since the night on the bridge, Aurora didn't feel like she was running. She felt like she belonged. It should have lasted, the quiet, the slow stitching of two broken lives into something whole. But the world has sharp edges, and theirs cut quickly. The story broke on a Thursday morning, carried by tabloids and gossip blogs faster than truth could breathe. Heiress Aurora Whitmore found living with single father in Brooklyn. Paparazzi swarmed their crumbling building by noon, camera flashes spitting white fire through the blinds. Strangers shouted her name in the hallway, voices sharp, hungry. Liam yanked the curtains shut, pulled Emma close against his chest. "Stay back," he murmured, though the child didn't understand why the walls now buzzed with voices that weren't kind. Aurora stood frozen in the kitchen, her phone vibrating non-stop on the counter, her father's name burning on the screen again and again. Then came the knock, hard, deliberate. Two men in tailored suits stood at the door, their shoes gleaming against the grime of the stairwell. "Miss Whitmore," one said evenly. "Your father requests your return. Immediately." "She's not a prisoner," Liam shot back. The man ignored him, gaze fixed only on Aurora. "If you refuse, Mr. Whitmore will pursue legal action. Against him, too." His glance flicked toward Liam with clinical disdain. "You know he doesn't have the resources to fight." Aurora's throat tightened. She looked at Liam, eyes brimming with apology. "I'll fix this," she whispered. "I just need time." And then, before he could stop her, she was gone, swept into the black sedan waiting downstairs. By sundown, Liam's name was dragged through the mud. Talk shows debated his motives. Anonymous sources claimed he preyed on wealthy women. One blog even twisted the night of the fire, accusing him of abandoning his post and letting his wife die. Lies, but they spread like gasoline across a flame. Contractors stopped calling. Neighbors whispered when he passed. Emma asked, small and confused, "Why isn't Aurora coming back?" Liam had no answer that wouldn't break her heart. He kissed her forehead and said, "She'll always care about us," though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Meanwhile, Aurora's world shrank into marble and glass. Her father's penthouse loomed over the city like a fortress, 25 floors up. Her phone was confiscated, her internet cut. Harold Whitmore paced in fury. "You've shamed this family," he snapped, voice echoing across the sterile white of the kitchen. "You've put yourself at risk for a man beneath you." Aurora's eyes flared. "He's more of a father than you ever were." His face hardened, the mask of a man who'd built empires and lost compassion in the process. "You'll do as you're told. No more childish rebellion. You'll marry Derek, and you'll forget this phase. I'm not your asset," she spat. The glass he held slammed against the counter, shattering. "You are whatever I say you are," he hissed. Then, colder. "Until further notice, you're grounded. Your room. No contact with the outside world." They locked the door behind her. Her window looked out over a city alive with lights, but none of them belonged to her. For 3 days she stayed in silence, pacing, her sketchbook untouched, rage and grief tearing through her chest. On the third night, at 3:12 a.m., she acted. Hoodie, jeans, a backpack with only what she could carry. She slipped through the emergency stairwell, heart pounding with each step, slid past the night security, and vanished into the storm. Liam was half asleep in Joe's recliner, Emma dozing across his lap, when the knock came. He opened the door cautiously. Aurora stood there, drenched, breathless, eyes bright with defiance. "If you'll still have me," she said, her voice trembling but unyielding, "I'm here. And if I have to give up everything, money, name, security, to live a real life, I will. I refuse to walk away from you." For a heartbeat, Liam could only stare. Then, wordlessly, he stepped aside. Aurora dropped her bag, crossed the threshold, and wrapped her arms around him and the sleepy child who blinked and whispered, "You came back." Aurora kissed Emma's forehead. "I did." And in that small, cluttered apartment, while the world outside howled with judgment and power, the storm inside finally settled. They weren't safe, they weren't certain, but they were together, and that was enough. The morning Aurora walked into her father's law office, the world seemed to pause. Gone were the pearls, the designer heels, the perfectly tailored dresses that once marked her as Harold Whitmore's heir. Instead, she wore jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and her hair tied back in a simple braid. She looked nothing like the daughter of a billionaire, and everything like a woman who had finally chosen her own path. Harold sat at the head of the long mahogany table, lawyers flanking him like armor. His eyes narrowed at the sight of her. "What is this?" he asked coldly. Aurora stood tall, a stack of papers in her hand. "I'm here to sign," she said. "Sign what, exactly?" "The papers. To renounce the Whitmore Trust. The inheritance. The shares. All of it." Her voice didn't waver. The room fell silent. A lawyer cleared his throat. "Miss Whitmore, this is ridiculous," Harold finished, standing abruptly. "You're angry. Not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking clearer than I ever have." She met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I don't want your money. Or your name. I want a life I build with my own hands, not one built on control and conditions." For a long moment, father and daughter stood in battle, one clinging to power, the other clinging to freedom. Finally, Harold's chest rose and fell, the anger in his eyes giving way to something else, something softer he couldn't admit aloud. "You walk out of this room," he said slowly. "And you walk away from everything." Aurora's lips curved, faint but certain. "No, Dad. I'm walking towards something real." She signed the papers with a steady hand and left without looking back. In the weeks that followed, Aurora started over. She found work in a tiny cafe in Williamsburg, wearing an apron instead of jewels. She learned to steam milk, scrub floors, and smile at impatient customers. She came home each night smelling of espresso and tired feet, but she had never been happier. Liam, still healing but strong enough to return to part-time construction work, split his hours between jobs and watching Emma. Together, they scrimped, saved, and began mapping out a plan, something bigger than survival. One day, Aurora sketched a storefront on a napkin. Liam added numbers beside it. Emma drew stick figures behind the counter. Slowly, the dream became brick and mortar. They found a small brownstone near the Brooklyn Bridge, patched walls with their own hands, painted them with Aurora's colors, built counters from reclaimed wood Liam salvaged from old sites. When the sign finally went up, "Second Chances" painted in warm gold, neighbors stopped by with curious smiles. On opening day, there were no cameras, no headlines, just the smell of cinnamon, the hum of conversation, and a little girl darting between tables in a tiny apron, proudly declaring, "You want coffee, mister?" It became more than a cafe. Aurora set aside a corner for weekly support groups, for people who needed to be reminded they mattered. Word spread. Students came to listen, strangers came to heal, and slowly, the little cafe turned into a sanctuary. One Thursday afternoon, Aurora stood before a small group, a mug cradled in her hands. "A year ago, I stood on the Brooklyn Bridge," she began. "I thought my life wasn't mine anymore. I thought I had no choice. And then, through the rain, a man carrying his child appeared. He reached out and reminded me that I was still worth saving." Her eyes found Liam and Emma at a table near the window. Emma waved, giggling. Liam smiled back, a quiet pride in his eyes. At the back of the room, a man in a gray suit sat alone, watching. Harold Whitmore. He didn't approach. He didn't announce himself. He only listened, a handkerchief trembling in his hand. Before he left, he slipped an envelope into the donation jar labeled "Pay What You Can." Inside was a sizable gift to the Second Chances Foundation, and a small note in his handwriting, "For her colors. H." Aurora found it later. She wept, not because she needed the money, but because for the first time, she knew her father had truly seen her. 1 year later, the bridge where it all began became the place where everything changed. Strings of fairy lights draped across its beams. Wildflowers lined the walkway. Liam stood in a simple suit, Emma in a white dress clutching a bouquet of daisies. Aurora walked barefoot down the aisle in a flowing gown, her hair loose in the breeze. Here, where one life almost ended, another began. After the ceremony, laughter and music filled the cafe. Friends toasted. Emma danced clumsily on Liam's shoes. Aurora leaned into his shoulder, her eyes shining. "If you hadn't stopped me," she whispered. "If you hadn't believed in me," he replied softly. Emma ran over, clutching a mug of cocoa too big for her hands. "I love this bridge," she announced proudly. "I'm going to tell everyone it's the Bridge of Hope." Liam and Aurora laughed, and for once, they believed her. Because some places aren't just where stories end. Some are where they truly begin. And under the Brooklyn sky, in the glow of second chances, they began theirs. The cafe's second chances grew slowly, like a tree taking root in unexpected soil. It was never meant to be glamorous, never meant to compete with sleek chains or glossy franchises. Its walls smelled of cinnamon and fresh paint, its tables mismatched, its shelves lined with Aurora's watercolor sketches and Emma's crayon masterpieces. And yet there was something in the air that drew people in, something honest, something warm. Every morning Liam would roll up the shutters at sunrise, his hands still calloused from construction work, while Aurora arranged flowers in chipped vases on each table. Emma, now nearly 4, darted around with a miniature apron and a wooden notepad she insisted on using to take orders, even if her spelling was no more than colorful scribbles. Neighbors who once passed Liam without a word now came in daily, offering smiles and nods. A retired teacher brought her knitting and claimed a corner chair. A young musician sat up quietly by the window and filled the space with soft guitar. Lonely souls lingered not just for coffee but for the chance to be seen. Aurora had started a tradition. Thursday evenings, the corner of the cafe transformed into a circle of chairs. Survivors of loss, of silence, of invisible battles gathered. Some spoke. Some listened. And Aurora would begin each night with the same words. "No one here is broken beyond repair. No one here is alone." One rainy evening, a college student stood trembling before the group, admitting she had once stood on the very bridge Aurora had. Aurora walked over, pressed her hand gently into the girl's, and whispered, "If you live, I'll be the first to thank you." The girl sobbed into her shoulder, and Liam, watching from behind the counter, felt that line ripple through the room like a promise. It wasn't long before words spread beyond Williamsburg. A journalist wrote a small feature titled "The Cafe That Heals." Photos of Aurora with Emma on her lap, paint smudged on their hands, and Liam smiling awkwardly in the background appeared in a weekend paper. The piece described not just coffee and muffins but the way second chances had become a bridge between despair and hope. Aurora read the article late one night, her eyes shimmering. She placed the paper down, turned to Liam and said, "Do you realize what we've built? People come here because they feel safe. Because for once, they're not invisible." Liam leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. "We didn't build it," he said softly. "It built us." Emma crawled between them on the couch, announcing proudly, "I'm the boss of the cafe." Both laughed, and Aurora kissed the top of her head. But the shadows of the past were never far. Some nights, Aurora would sit awake at the cafe after closing, staring out at the Brooklyn Bridge glowing against the water. She would think of the girl she had been that night, barefoot, broken, ready to let go, and wonder at the strange mercy that had brought Liam running through the rain. And sometimes, on those nights, a quiet figure would appear in the cafe doorway. Her father. He never stayed long, never spoke much. He would order black coffee, leave a folded check in the donation jar, and watch silently as Emma tugged Aurora's hand to show her a new drawing. He always left before anyone could thank him. Aurora found those unsigned notes in his careful handwriting, for her colors. For her second chance. Each one made her cry, not for the money, but for the slow thawing of a man who had once been made of ice. Then, a year to the day after Liam had pulled her from the bridge, they returned there, not as strangers, not as broken souls, but as a family. Strings of fairy lights glowed across the steel beams, wildflowers lined the path. Guests gathered in simple chairs, their faces lit with quiet joy. Emma skipped down the walkway in a white dress, her bouquet bouncing. Liam stood in a suit that fit only because Joe had tailored it himself, his eyes never leaving Aurora as she approached barefoot in a flowing gown. When their hands met, the officiant's words rose above the hum of the river. Here, where one life almost ended, another begins. They exchanged vows not written in grand speeches but in the simple language of survival. I will stay. I will carry. I will not let go. The applause that followed was quiet but full, like rain that nourishes instead of destroys. And when they kissed, Emma cheered so loudly the bridge itself seemed to echo. That night, the cafe glowed with laughter, with music, with toasts from friends who had once been strangers. Aurora leaned her head against Liam's shoulder and whispered, "If you hadn't stopped me." He kissed her hair. "If you hadn't believed me." Emma bounded over, clutching a cocoa mug bigger than her hands. "This is the Bridge of Hope," she shouted. And they believed her. Because the Brooklyn Bridge was no longer just a span of steel and stone. It was the place where a father, a child, and a lost heiress had found each other. The place where endings had turned into beginnings. The place where second chances became more than a name. And under its lights they learned that love, the real kind, was not about wealth or safety or certainty. It was about staying. About choosing again, every single day, even when the storm threatened to return. And together they chose. Life after the wedding did not suddenly turn into a fairy tale. Bills still came in thick envelopes, Liam's hands still cracked in winter air, and Aurora still pulled double shifts at the cafe when someone called out. But the difference was in the way they faced it, together, hand in hand, never alone again. The cafe's second chances became more than just a place for coffee. It became a landmark whispered about in neighborhoods far beyond Brooklyn. Travelers crossed the bridge to sit under its warm lights, not because they needed caffeine, but because they needed a reminder that broken people could be made whole, that storms could pass. On Saturdays, the corner filled with children's laughter as Aurora set up Colors in the Soul, a free art class where kids from the block dipped brushes into jars of paint and turned blank paper into galaxies. Emma, apron smeared with every color imaginable, introduced Aurora to each child proudly. "This is my mom. She teaches magic." Aurora would laugh, but her eyes always filled, because to be called mom by a child who had once whispered, "New mommy?" was the kind of gift no empire could buy. Liam found a rhythm too. He split his time between cafe repairs and part-time construction, but he was happiest when he was behind the counter, sleeves rolled, making Emma laugh with foamy milk mustaches. Customers who once only ordered drinks now stayed to talk, telling him stories of loss, of survival. He listened, nodding, the way he once listened for voices in burning buildings. His strength wasn't loud anymore. It was quiet, steady, the kind people leaned on without realizing. Aurora's father remained a ghost at the edges of their lives. Sometimes a folded check appeared in the donation jar, sometimes an unsigned note slipped under the cafe door, for her dreams. For Emma's smile. He never asked to be forgiven. He simply watched from the distance, and little by little, his presence became less a shadow of control and more a whisper of regret. Then one spring evening, just as the cafe closed, Aurora noticed a man lingering outside. Harold Whitmore. His hair was grayer, his shoulders heavier, but his eyes, once steel, now carried something fragile. Emma pressed her nose to the glass. "That's the man who leaves the secret notes," she announced proudly. Aurora froze, then opened the door. For a moment, father and daughter simply stared at each other, the city humming around them. Finally, Harold pressed the small, wrapped package into Emma's hands. Inside was a book bound in leather, the title pressed in gold, Second Chances. On the first page, in neat script, he had written, "To Emma Carter, who reminded us all what family means." Aurora's breath caught. Her father looked at her then, his voice low. "I thought legacy was buildings and names on skylines. But what you've built here." He gestured at the cafe, at the glowing lights, at the laughter drifting through the door. "This is what lasts." His voice cracked, a sound Aurora had never heard from him. "You don't have to become someone else to make me proud. You already have." No apology followed. None was needed. For the first time, forgiveness bloomed between them without being forced. That night, after the last guest left, Liam and Aurora sat outside the cafe. The Brooklyn Bridge arched behind them, its lights scattering across the water. Emma ran barefoot on the pavement, clutching a cocoa mug, squealing, "I love this bridge! It's the Bridge of Hope!" Liam chuckled, pulling Aurora closer. She rested her head against his shoulder, her eyes soft with gratitude. "If you hadn't stopped me that night," he kissed her hair. "If you hadn't believed in me after the fire." They both fell silent, listening to Emma's laughter echo against steel and stone. The bridge, once a place of despair, had become their altar, their home, their symbol. A reminder that even in the darkest storms, someone might reach out a hand and change everything. And in the glow of that truth, beneath the quiet roar of the city, Liam, Aurora, and Emma chose again, chose each other, chose love, chose life. Because some bridges don't just carry people across water. Some carry them from endings to beginnings. And theirs had carried them all the way to forever. The years that followed unfolded like pages written slowly, each line etched with struggle and tenderness. The cafe's Second Chances was no longer just a neighborhood refuge, it had become part of the city's heartbeat. Students studied there late into the night, tired nurses sipped tea at dawn, and travelers scribbled postcards at the corner table by the window. On the walls hung photographs, the Brooklyn Bridge in rain, Aurora painting with children, Liam lifting Emma high into the air while both laughed, free and unguarded. Aurora's art classes blossomed into something greater. Twice a week, she opened the cafe doors after hours for anyone who wanted to paint. Adults came, too, people who had lost jobs, parents who had lost children, elders who felt forgotten. Aurora gave them brushes and said, "Let the colors speak where words can't." Slowly, canvases filled the walls, each one a testament to resilience. Customers began calling that corner the Gallery of Hope. Emma thrived in this world of warmth. By 6, she was a chatterbox, greeting customers with the confidence of someone who believed the cafe truly belonged to her. She told every new face proudly, "My daddy saved my mommy on the bridge. That's why this place is here." People would smile, sometimes cry, and order an extra coffee just to stay longer. Liam, meanwhile, grew into a quiet anchor. His body still carried scars from years of hard labor, but he had found a steadier rhythm. Mornings began with coffee, evenings with Emma's bedtime story, nights with Aurora's sketching beside him at the kitchen table. He no longer lived only for survival, he lived with purpose. And when he watched Aurora work with the same fiery compassion she once thought she had lost forever, he knew their second chance had become a first life worth keeping. Harold Whitmore's presence wove itself gently into the background of their days. He visited sometimes, not as a man of power, but as a father who was learning, belatedly, how to be human. He would sit quietly with Emma, reading her the book Second Chances he had once gifted her, his voice trembling at parts. Aurora never forced reconciliation, she let it grow in its own time, one shared story, one awkward smile at a time. One summer afternoon, the cafe hosted its first Bridge of Hope Festival. It began as a small idea. Aurora suggested hanging lanterns across the cafe windows and inviting neighbors to share stories of the moment someone saved them. But word spread quickly. On the evening of the festival, dozens gathered. Paper lanterns bobbed in the warm air, children chalked rainbows onto the sidewalks, and a local guitarist played soft melodies. Aurora stood on a small step stool, her voice carrying across the street. "A year ago, I thought my life was over. But I was wrong. Someone showed me that no one is ever too far gone for a second chance. Tonight, we celebrate that truth, not just mine, not just Liam's, but everyone's." She looked at Liam, standing with Emma on his shoulders, lantern light shimmering on their faces. He gave her a nod, small but steady, the kind that spoke louder than speeches. As the crowd cheered, lanterns lifted into the sky, drifting toward the Brooklyn Bridge where their story had begun. Aurora slipped her hand into Liam's, and Emma leaned her head against his. For the first time, Aurora realized she was no longer haunted by the image of herself on that railing. When she thought of the bridge now, she saw light, laughter, and the promise of beginnings. Later that night, as the cafe dimmed and the lanterns floated away like fireflies, Harold approached his daughter quietly. His voice was low, almost broken. "You've built something I never could with all my money." Aurora touched his hand gently. "Maybe we both had to learn what really matters." For the first time in decades, Harold smiled, not the polished smile of boardrooms, but a fragile, genuine one. When Aurora went back inside, Liam wrapped an arm around her waist. She leaned into him, the hum of the city wrapping around them like a lullaby. Emma, exhausted, had already fallen asleep in Joe's lap at a corner table. "This doesn't feel like a second chance anymore," Aurora whispered. "It feels like the first time I've really lived." Liam kissed her temple softly. "That's all I ever wanted, for both of us." Outside, the bridge glowed against the night sky. Once a place of despair, it now stood eternal, not just as steel and stone but as the living symbol of their family. And as lanterns faded into the horizon, Liam, Aurora, and Emma knew that storms would always come, but so would hope, as long as they chose each other. Because sometimes, the greatest miracle isn't being saved. It's learning, at last, how to truly live.